The comment was a shard of ice, dropped down the back of her dress. "She looks like a servant," Kwon Hyorin murmured, her voice a silken thread of contempt meant to be overheard. She sipped her champagne, her eyes, sharp and cold as her brother's, raking over Han Sumin's simple black dress. Sumin's hand, which had been resting on Kwon Ji-hoon's arm, tightened instinctively. A flush of heat crept up her neck. She felt the eyes of the entire room, a glittering assembly of Seoul's elite, predators in silk and diamonds, settle upon her. She was an anomaly here, a wildflower in a meticulously curated hothouse, and everyone knew it. Ji-hoon did not react. He did not turn to his sister. His gaze remained fixed forward, his profile carved from granite. For a terrifying second, Soo-min thought he was going to ignore it, to let the insult hang in the air and fester. The thought was a cold stone in her stomach. Perhaps Hyorin was right. Perhaps that was all she was to him, a temporary amusement. Then he moved. His motion was fluid, deliberate. He took her hand from his arm, his fingers cool and firm around hers. He turned her slightly to face him, his body a shield between her and the prying eyes of the crowd. His expression was unreadable, but the intensity in his dark eyes held her captive, silencing the frantic beating of her heart. He said nothing. Words were too clumsy for a man like him. Instead, he reached into the pocket of his tailored jacket. He withdrew a small velvet box. With a soft click, he opened it. Nestled inside was a ring, not a diamond, but a single, luminous piece of jade, so pale it was almost white, set in a delicate lattice of platinum that looked ancient and impossibly precious. It was the ring of the Yunwol matriarch, a symbol of power passed down for generations. He took the ring from the box. He lifted her left hand. His thumb brushed over her knuckles, a silent apology, a silent promise. And then, in the suffocating silence of the grand ballroom, under the weight of 100 hostile stares, Kwon Ji-hoon, the fearsome head of the Unwol clan, slid the ring onto her finger. It was a perfect fit. He raised her hand to his lips and pressed a kiss to the jade, his eyes never leaving hers. It was not a proposal. It was a coronation. It was a declaration of war. He finally turned his head, his gaze sweeping over his stunned sister and the silent room. His voice, when he spoke, was quiet, yet it cut through the air like a blade. "She is not a servant," he said. "She is the owner of this house and everything in it, including me." 6 months earlier, Han Soo-min had owned nothing but a mountain of debt and a stubborn, flickering dream. Her world was a cramped apartment she shared with her friend Bora, the smell of kimchi and instant noodles a permanent fixture in the air. Her life was a frantic cycle of shifts, serving overpriced wine to the wealthy at the exclusive restaurant La Lune, then rushing to a late-night tutoring gig, all to send money back to her mother and pay for the art supplies that were her only escape. Her hands, which longed to hold a charcoal stick or a paintbrush, were more accustomed to the weight of a heavy serving tray. She was tired. A deep, bone-weary exhaustion had settled into her marrow, but she refused to let it extinguish the fire in her spirit. She was a survivor, resilient and sharp-tongued, her wit a shield against the casual condescension she faced daily. She hated working at La Lune. It was a gilded cage where she watched people spend more on a single bottle of wine than she made in a month. It was a constant glaring reminder of the chasm between her world and theirs. Yet it was there, amidst the clinking of crystal and the low hum of entitled conversation, that her world tilted on its axis. He came in on a Tuesday. Tuesdays were usually quiet, but this group was different. They didn't need to speak loudly to command the space. The air itself seemed to bend around them. There were 4 men, all dressed in dark, impeccably tailored suits that cost more than her tuition. The one who sat at the head of the table was different. Kwon Ji-hoon lived a life of monastic discipline and brutal control. His world was one of whispered orders and swift consequences. As the reluctant heir and now leader of the Yunwol clan, his days were a tightly controlled sequence of meetings in sterile boardrooms and tense negotiations in shadowy backrooms. His organization, founded by his grandfather, had its roots in the dark underbelly of Seoul's reconstruction, but Ji-hoon was dragging it, kicking and screaming, toward a semblance of legitimacy. It was a violent, bloody process. Loneliness was the air he breathed. It was the silence in his sprawling penthouse overlooking the Han River, the empty space on the other side of his bed. He had power, wealth, respect born of fear. He had everything, and he had nothing. Love was a liability, a weakness his enemies would exploit. He had accepted this. He had built walls of ice around his heart, and he believed them to be impenetrable, until he saw her. He was in the middle of a discussion about a hostile takeover of a shipping firm, the words of his subordinate, Min Jun, a familiar drone in his ear. He had lifted his glass of water and his eyes had drifted across the room. And then they stopped. She was standing by a service station, her back partially to him, refilling a water pitcher. She wore the simple black uniform of the waitstaff, her dark hair pulled back in a severe ponytail. There was nothing overtly remarkable about her. She was not the polished, surgically perfected beauty he was accustomed to seeing. But there was something in the determined set of her jaw, the graceful efficiency of her movements, the weary slump of her shoulders that she tried so hard to hide. Then she turned, and her eyes briefly met his from across the room. The world went silent. The clatter of cutlery, the murmur of conversation, Min Jun's voice, it all faded into a distant hum. It was as if a spotlight had singled her out, illuminating her in a sea of gray. He saw the faint smudge of charcoal on her cheek, a tiny imperfection that was more captivating than any flawless makeup. He saw the exhaustion in her eyes, but beneath it, a defiant spark, a flicker of a soul that refused to be crushed. It was not love at first sight. It was something more primal, more terrifying. It was recognition, a deep, instinctual jolt that told him he had found a missing piece of himself. The ice around his heart did not melt. It shattered. "Sir?" Min Jun's voice broke through the spell. "Chairman Kwon?" Ji-hoon blinked, the sound of the restaurant rushing back in. He lowered his glass, his hand perfectly steady, betraying none of the seismic chaos erupting within him. "Who is she?" His voice was quiet, dangerously so. Min Jun followed his gaze. "A waitress, sir. I don't know her name." "Find out!" Ji-hoon commanded, his eyes still locked on her as she moved between tables. "Find out everything." Sumin felt his stare like a physical touch. She tried to ignore it, focusing on her tasks, on the orders she had to take, the glasses she had to fill, but the intensity of his gaze was a brand on her skin. She glanced over once more, a brief, furtive look. He was still watching her, his face a mask of cold neutrality, but his eyes were burning. A shiver, not entirely of fear, traced its way down her spine. She told herself it was just another arrogant rich man, bored with his dinner companions. But she knew, with a certainty that unsettled her, that this was different. This was trouble. The trouble began the next day. A delivery arrived at her apartment, a ridiculously large bouquet of white peonies. There was no card. Bora, her roommate, was ecstatic. "You have a secret admirer. They must be rich, Sumin. These are imported." Sumin stared at the flowers with suspicion. "It's creepy," she said, her voice flat. "How did they get my address?" She threw them out, ignoring Bora's horrified gasp. The next night, he was back at the restaurant, alone this time at a small table in her section. The manager, flustered and obsequious, had tried to assign the table to a senior waitress, but the man had insisted. "I want her," he had said, his voice low, his gaze flicking to where Sumin was standing. It was not a request. Her hands trembled slightly as she approached his table. "Good evening. May I take your order?" she asked, her voice clipped and professional. He didn't look at the menu. He looked at her. "My name is Kwon Ji-hoon. I'll need your order, sir." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. It didn't reach his eyes. I know you threw away the flowers. Sumin's blood ran cold. I don't know what you're talking about. Yes, you do, he said softly. What is your name? She hesitated, her training screaming at her to be polite, her instincts screaming at her to run. It's on my name tag. He leaned forward slightly. I want you to tell me. The sheer force of his will was suffocating. Sumin! She finally gritted out. Han Sumin! Han Sumin, he repeated, the name sounding foreign and intimate on his tongue. I would like to take you to dinner. Somewhere other than here. Sumin almost laughed. The audacity was breathtaking. I'm sorry, sir. I don't date customers. It was a lie. She didn't date anyone. She didn't have the time or the energy. Then quit, he said, as if it were the simplest thing in the world. Her temper, always simmering just below the surface, flared. And how would I pay my bills, sir, with your good intentions? The sarcasm hit him, but he didn't flinch. Instead, he looked intrigued. I can solve your financial problems. That was it. That was the line. He was just like all the others, she thought, a wave of bitter disappointment washing over her. He thought he could buy her. My soul is not for sale, she said, her voice sharp as broken glass. Now, if you're not going to order, I have other tables to attend to. She turned and walked away, her heart pounding against her ribs. She expected to be fired on the spot. She expected him to cause a scene. But when she dared to glance back, he was simply watching her, a strange, contemplative expression on his face. He left 20 minutes later, leaving enough cash on the table to cover a meal for 10 and a tip that was more than her weekly salary. She left the money for the other staff. Ji-hoon sat in the back of his car, the city lights blurring past the tinted windows. He was not angry. He was captivated. No one had spoken to him like that in over a decade. No one dared. Her defiance was like a splash of cold water, waking a part of him he thought was long dead. She refused me, he said to the empty car, a dry, self-deprecating smile on his face. Min-jun had provided him with a file on her that morning. Han Soo-min, 24 years old, art student on indefinite leave from Hongik University. Father deceased, mother in Busan with mounting medical bills, a younger brother in the military, and a staggering amount of debt left behind by her father. She was drowning, and yet she had looked at him, a man who could offer her a lifeline, and told him her soul was not for sale. He wanted her more than he had ever wanted anything. His pursuit became more relentless, yet strangely subtle. He stopped coming to the restaurant. Instead, things began to happen in Sumin's life. The loan shark who had been harassing her mother suddenly disappeared, the debt marked as paid in full. An anonymous benefactor established a scholarship at her university specifically for students of fine art returning from a leave of absence, a scholarship for which she was the only qualified applicant. Her application was accepted the day after it was submitted. Sumin knew. She knew it was him. And it terrified her as much as it infuriated her. This was not a courtship. It was an invasion. He was a ghost in her life, pulling strings from the shadows, rearranging her world without her permission. This is not romantic, Bora. It's stalking, she fumed one night, pacing their tiny living room. Is it even legal? Bora, ever the pragmatist, shrugged. Your mom is safe, and you can go back to school. As far as stalkers go, a rich, handsome, and helpful one seems like the best kind. You're not helping. The final straw came a week later. She was leaving her reinstated night class, her bag heavy with sketchbooks, when a sleek black car pulled up beside her. The back window glided down, revealing Kwon Ji-hoon. Get in the car, Soo-min, he said. She stood her ground, clutching her bag like a shield. Leave me alone. I paid your family's debt. I funded your scholarship. The least you can do is have a conversation with me. His voice was calm, reasonable, but there was an undercurrent of steel. She hated that he was right. She hated the feeling of being indebted to this powerful, enigmatic man. With a sigh of resignation, she opened the door and slid into the leather-scented interior. The car was silent as it moved through the city. "Where are you taking me?" she asked, her voice tight with suspicion. "Somewhere I can't be bought," he replied. He didn't take her to a fancy restaurant or a lavish club. He took her to a small, unassuming noodle shop tucked away in a quiet neighborhood, the kind of place with steam-fogged windows and an elderly couple running the counter. It was the last place she expected him to go. They sat at a small wooden table, the air thick with the smell of broth. "My mother used to bring me here," he said, his voice softer than she'd ever heard it. "Before everything. Before I became who I am now." Su-min looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time. In the harsh, fluorescent light of the shop, stripped of the trappings of his power, she could see the faint lines of exhaustion around his eyes. She saw the scar that bisected his left eyebrow, a thin white line that hinted at a violent past, and for a fleeting moment she saw not the intimidating tycoon, but a man carrying an immense weight. "Why?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Why me?" Ji-hoon looked down at his hands, then back up at her. His gaze was so direct, so raw, it felt like he was looking directly into her soul. "Because when I saw you," he said slowly, each word carefully chosen, "it was the first time in 10 years I remembered how to breathe. Because you look at me and you are not afraid, and you are not impressed. You just see me. And I have been invisible for a very long time." The honesty of his confession disarmed her. The witty retort, the sarcastic comeback she had ready, died on her lips. In its place was a strange, fluttering warmth in her chest. This was not about money. This was not about power. This was about a profound loneliness she recognized, because she felt it too. She didn't agree to a second date. She didn't have to. It was simply understood that this was the beginning. Their dates were a study in contrasts. One night, he would take her to a private symphony performance where they were the only audience members. The next, she would drag him to a crowded street market to eat tteokbokki from a paper cup, and he would watch her with a fascinated, tender smile as she navigated the chaos. She began to see the man behind the myth. She saw his dry, self-deprecating humor. She saw the surprising gentleness in his hands when he patched up a cut on her finger. She discovered his secret love for old black-and-white movies and his encyclopedic knowledge of military history. He, in turn, was in awe of her talent. He would sit for hours in the corner of her small studio space, watching her draw, the fierce concentration on her face more beautiful to him than any masterpiece. He brought a sense of safety and stability to her chaotic life. With her debts gone and her tuition paid, the crushing weight on her shoulders began to lift. She could focus on her art, on her future. He never asked for anything in return, content just to be in her presence. But the shadows of his world were never far away. They were in the constant presence of Min-jun, his silent, watchful second in command. They were in the tense, coded phone calls he would take in another room, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous command. They were in the way he would sometimes go still, his eyes looking at something far away, his expression hardening into the cold mask she had first seen at the restaurant. She tried not to ask. She was afraid of the answer. She was falling in love with Kwon Ji-hoon, and she clung to the fragile piece they had built, not wanting to look too closely at the foundations. The illusion shattered on a rainy Thursday night. He had taken her to his penthouse for the first time. It was a palace of glass and steel with a view that seemed to encompass all of Seoul. It was beautiful, sterile, and lonely. As they stood by the window, watching the rain streak down the glass, his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, and his entire demeanor changed. The gentle man she was with disappeared, replaced by the cold, decisive leader of the Yunwol clan. "I have to go," he said, his voice clipped. "What is it? What's wrong?" she asked, a knot of dread tightening in her stomach. He turned to her, and for a second she saw a flicker of conflict in his eyes, a desire to protect her, warring with the brutal truth. "It's business," he said, the words a clear dismissal. But this time it wasn't enough for her. What kind of business requires you to leave in the middle of the night with a look on your face like you're going to war?" He was silent for a long moment, the only sound the drumming of the rain against the window. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of profound weariness. "Sumin," he began, his voice heavy, "there are things about me, about my family, about my work, that you don't know." "Then tell me," she insisted, stepping closer. "I'm not a child, Ji-hoon. I deserve to know who I'm with." He looked at her fierce, determined face, and he knew she was right. He could not keep her in a gilded cage, separate from the truth of his life. If he wanted all of her, he had to give her all of him, the good, the bad, and the monstrous. He led her to a large leather sofa and sat down, his hands clasped between his knees. He looked less like a kingpin and more like a man awaiting a verdict. "My family," he started, his voice low and steady, "is the Yunwol clan. You've probably heard the name. The news calls us a corporate enterprise. The police call us an organized crime syndicate. Both are true." Sumin's breath hitched. The Yunwol clan. She knew the name. Everyone in Seoul knew the name. They were whispers, legends, feared and respected. They were associated with violence, corruption, and a history written in blood. He told her everything. He told her about his grandfather, who built an empire from the rubble of war through intimidation and brute force. He told her about his father, a cold traditionalist who believed in power above all else. He told her about the legacy that had been thrust upon him, a crown he never wanted. He explained the nature of their business, the legitimate fronts like construction and logistics that washed the money from the darker enterprises. He didn't sugarcoat it. He told her about the violence, the rivalries, the constant threat that was the price of his power. "The business I have to attend to tonight," he said, his eyes meeting hers, devoid of any deception, "is a retaliation. A rival family tried to move in on our territory. My men were attacked. I have to respond. It is my duty." Sumin sat in stunned silence, his words echoing in the vast, empty room. The man she had come to love, the man who watched her draw with such tenderness, the man who confessed his loneliness in a humble noodle shop, was a gangster, a mafia boss. The world she had carefully rebuilt for herself fractured, the pieces falling around her. Her principles, her belief in right and wrong, her entire moral compass was spinning wildly. She thought of her father, a good man who worked himself into an early grave trying to do things the right way. And here she was, in love with a man who represented everything he had stood against. You hurt people," she whispered, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. "I do what is necessary to protect my people and my family," he said, his voice devoid of apology. It was a simple statement of fact. "This is my world, Sumin. This is who I am." She looked at him, at his handsome face, now seeming like a cruel mask. The safety he had provided her suddenly felt like a cage. The money that had freed her felt like blood money. She felt a wave of nausea. "I can't," she said, shaking her head, the tears she had been holding back finally starting to fall. "I can't be a part of this." Ji-hoon's expression remained unreadable, but a muscle twitched in his jaw. He had known this was a possibility. He had prepared himself for it, but the reality of it, the pain of it, was a physical blow. "I am not asking you to be a part of it," he said, his voice strained. "I am asking you to be a part of me. I can keep you separate. I can keep you safe." "Safe?" she cried, a hysterical laugh bubbling up in her throat. "How can I be safe with you? How can I look at myself in the mirror, knowing that the food I eat, the roof over my head, is paid for by that?" She couldn't even say the words. She stood up, her legs shaking. "I have to go." He stood up as well, his tall frame blocking her path. For a second, she thought he would stop her, that he would use that immense force of will to keep her there. "I love you, Ji-hoon," she whispered, the confession tearing from her soul. "But I can't do this. I can't become someone I hate." He didn't move. His face was a mask of stone, but his eyes were filled with a pain so profound it mirrored her own. He had laid his dark, twisted world at her feet, and she had rejected it. He had shown her the monster, and she was running away. He couldn't even blame her. He stepped aside. The gesture was more final than any argument. It was an acceptance of her decision. She walked past him, her body numb. At the door, she paused, her hand on the handle, and looked back at him. He stood alone in the center of the vast, opulent room, a king in an empty castle, more isolated than ever before. She turned the handle and walked out into the rain, leaving him behind in the silence. The weeks that followed were a gray, colorless blur for Sumin. She went through the motions of life, but the vibrancy was gone. She went to her classes, she worked on her art, but there was no joy in it. Her charcoal sketches were all of shadows and sharp, angry lines. Her paintings were muted and heavy with a sorrow she couldn't articulate. She had made the right choice. She repeated it to herself like a mantra. Her principles were intact. Her conscience was clear. So why did her heart feel like it had been carved out of her chest? Bora tried to help. "You did what you had to do," she would say, wrapping a blanket around Sumin's shoulders. "You can't build a life on a foundation like that." "I know," Sumin would whisper. "I know." But at night, alone in her bed, she would remember the softness in his eyes when he watched her draw, the surprising warmth of his hand in hers. She missed the sound of his voice, the dry wit, the sense of absolute safety she had felt in his arms, however illusory it may have been. The world felt dangerous and cold again, not because of men like him, but because he was no longer in it. For Ji-hoon, her absence was a wound that would not heal. The light she had brought into his sterile existence was extinguished, plunging him back into a darkness deeper than before. He threw himself into his work with a renewed, cold ferocity. He was ruthless, efficient, and merciless. He crushed the rival family that had challenged him, his response so brutal it sent a chill through the entire underworld. He was the perfect leader, the perfect monster. And he was utterly miserable. His penthouse, once a symbol of his power, now felt like a mausoleum. Her scent lingered in the air, a ghostly reminder of what he had lost. He would find himself staring at the noodle shop they had visited, the memory a sharp, painful ache in his chest. "You should have forced her to stay," his father, Chairman Kwan, said during one of their tense weekly meetings. The old man had been delighted by Su Min's departure. "A woman like that, a commoner, she is a weakness. Love is a disease for men like us." Ji-hoon looked at his father, at the cold, calculating man who had never shown an ounce of affection, and he felt a wave of revulsion. For the first time, he saw his future laid out before him, a long, lonely path of power and violence, ending just like his father, an empty husk of a man, surrounded by wealth and feared by all, but loved by none. The thought was unbearable. Min-jun watched his friend and his boss with growing concern. He saw the self-destructive path Ji-hoon was on. The man who had briefly learned how to breathe was now suffocating. "This is not what she would have wanted," Min-jun said one evening, finding Ji-hoon drinking alone in his office, a rare indulgence. "She is not here," Ji-hoon bit out, his voice rough. "No," Min-jun agreed softly, "because of what we are." "Have you ever considered that perhaps she was right?" Ji-hoon slammed his glass down, the whiskey sloshing over the rim. "What would you have me do, Min-jun? Abandon my family? Renounce my name? This is all I have ever known." "Perhaps it is time to know something else," Min-jun replied, his loyalty to his friend overriding his fear of his boss. "The world is changing, Ji-hoon. Our way of life. It is a dinosaur. It cannot last. You have the power to change it, to build something that she could be a part of, something that would not make her ashamed." The words struck a chord deep within Ji-hoon. He had been trying to compartmentalize his life, to build a small, clean space for Sumin within his dirty world. But she had been right. It was impossible. The darkness would always bleed through. The only way to have her was not to shield her from his world, but to change the world itself. The idea was terrifying. It was radical. It was treason. It would mean war, not with his rivals, but with his own family, with his own history. It could get him killed. He looked around his office, at the trappings of his dark kingdom. He thought of Sumin's bright, hopeful art. He thought of a future where he could hold her hand without feeling like he was staining her with blood. For the first time in a long time, he felt a flicker of something other than despair. He felt a sliver of hope. The change was seismic. It began not with a bang, but with a quiet order given to Min-jun. Ji-hoon started the arduous, perilous process of untangling the Eunwol clan's legitimate businesses from its criminal enterprises. It was like performing surgery on a living, breathing monster. Every cut was met with resistance. He started selling off the nightclubs, the gambling dens, the loan sharking operations, the pillars of his family's wealth. He faced outrage from his captains and lieutenants, men who had grown rich on the old ways. He met their anger with cold, unyielding resolve. Some he bought out, some he threatened, a few he had to break. He poured the money into expanding their construction and shipping companies, pushing for transparency and legitimate contracts. He hired teams of lawyers and accountants, men in suits who were more afraid of the tax office than a rival gang. The biggest battle was with his own father. Chairman Kwon was apoplectic. He saw his son's actions as a betrayal of their legacy, a desecration of his grandfather's memory. "You are a fool!" the old man roared, his voice echoing in the sterile boardroom. "You are taking a lion and trying to turn it into a house cat. You are destroying everything we have built." "You built a kingdom on sand, father," Ji-hoon replied, his voice calm and steady. "It was always destined to be washed away. I am building one on rock, something that will last, something clean." The confrontation was brutal. It fractured the family, creating factions loyal to the old chairman and those who saw the wisdom in Ji-hoon's new vision. There were whispers of a coup, threats against his life. Ji-hoon moved through the danger with a serenity that baffled his enemies. He was a man with nothing left to lose, and it made him invincible. He was fighting for more than a company. He was fighting for a chance at redemption. He was fighting for Su-min. Months passed, months of brutal negotiations, backroom deals, and the constant threat of violence. Min-jun was his constant shadow, his unwavering right hand. Slowly, painstakingly, the tide began to turn. The Eunwol Corporation began to emerge from the shadows of the Eunwol clan, a leaner, more legitimate, but still formidable entity. The work was far from over, but a foundation had been laid. The first clean bricks were in place. During all this time, he never contacted Su-min. He knew he had no right. Not yet, but he kept track of her. He knew she had won a prestigious art award. He knew she was having her first small exhibition at a gallery in Insadong. The news was a beacon of light in his dark world, a reminder of what he was fighting for. The day of her exhibition, he knew it was time. He shed the dark suit and the armor of his position. He dressed in simple gray trousers and a soft cashmere sweater. He looked in the mirror and saw not the chairman of the Eunwol Corporation, but just a man who was weary, scarred, but hopeful. He drove himself, leaving Min-jun and his security detail behind. The gallery was small and bright, the walls filled with her work. It was breathtaking. He saw her pain in the dark, chaotic abstracts, but he also saw her hope in the vibrant landscapes. Her soul was on the canvas. And then he saw her. She was standing in the corner, talking to a potential buyer, looking nervous and beautiful. She wore a simple white dress, and her hair was down, framing her face. She looked up, her eyes scanning the room, and then they met his. Her breath caught. The world, once again, seemed to fall away, leaving only the two of them. All the months of pain and longing, of anger and heartbreak, hung in the air between them. She excused herself and walked towards him, her steps hesitant. She stopped a few feet away, Her arms crossed over her chest, a protective gesture. "What are you doing here, Ji-hoon?" she asked, her voice quiet but steady. He didn't answer right away. He just looked at her, memorizing her face, quenching a thirst he hadn't realized was killing him. "I've changed things," he said finally, his voice rough with emotion. "I'm changing things. I sold the businesses, the illegal ones. I'm trying to make it clean." He gave a short, humorless laugh. "My father is trying to have me killed. Most of my old associates think I'm insane, but I'm doing it." Soo-min stared at him, searching his face for the truth. She saw the exhaustion there, the new lines of stress around his eyes. But she also saw something that had never been there before. A lightness. A freedom. "Why?" she whispered. He took a step closer, closing the distance between them. He reached out, his hand hovering in the air for a moment before he gently tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear. His touch was electric, sending a shiver through her entire body. "Because you were right," he said, his voice thick with unshed tears. "You cannot build a life on a foundation of darkness. I didn't want a clean space in a dirty world. I want a clean world. For you. With you." He looked down, his vulnerability laid bare. "It's not finished. It might never be perfectly clean. But I swear to you, Soo-min, I will spend the rest of my life washing away the blood." Tears welled in her eyes. The sacrifice, the sheer magnitude of what he had done, what he was doing for her. It overwhelmed her. The dam of her resolve, of her principles, of her pride broke. All that was left was the undeniable, all-consuming love she still felt for this man. This changed man. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. She reached up, her hands framing his face, and pulled him down to her. The kiss was not gentle. It was a collision of two souls who had been starving for each other. It was desperate and deep, filled with the pain of their separation and the soaring hope of their reunion. It was a promise, a forgiveness, and a new beginning, all in one breath. In the quiet corner of the bright gallery, surrounded by her art, they found their way back to each other. 1 year later, they stood in the grand ballroom of the Kwon family estate. It was Ji-hoon's formal inauguration as the undisputed chairman of the new Yunwol Corporation. The air was thick with tension. The old guard was there, their faces grim. The new guard, the men and women in business suits, watched with cautious optimism. It was the dawn of a new era. Soo-min stood by his side, no longer the wary waitress, but a confident woman. Her own art career had taken off, her success her own, but she chose to stand with him, a partner in the new world he was building. She wore a simple black dress, an intentional choice, a quiet act of defiance against the opulence around her. That was when Ji-hoon's sister, Hyo-rin, a relic of the old world, glided over. Her eyes, filled with the same cold fire as her father's, swept over Soo-min. "She looks like a servant," Hyo-rin murmured, the venom in her voice unmistakable. The insult, which once would have shattered Soo-min, now felt like a pebble thrown against a fortress. She felt Ji-hoon's hand tighten on hers, not in anger but in reassurance. He turned to her, his eyes full of a love that silenced the entire room. He pulled out the velvet box, revealing the ancient jade ring. As he slid it onto her finger, it was more than just a ring. It was a symbol of everything they had overcome. It was a testament to a love that had the power not just to redeem a man, but to remake a world. He kissed her hand, his gaze never leaving hers. "She is not a servant," he declared, his voice ringing with absolute authority. "She is the owner of this house, and everything in it, including me." Later that night, long after the guests had departed, they stood on the balcony of his penthouse, the city lights of Seoul spread out beneath them like a carpet of fallen stars. The silence was no longer lonely, it was peaceful. Soo-min leaned her head against his shoulder, the cool jade of the ring a comforting weight on her finger. "Was it worth it?" she asked softly. "All of it?" Ji-hoon wrapped his arms around her, pulling her close. He looked out at the city he now commanded, not with fear, but with a legitimate power. He thought of the battles, the betrayals, the blood, and the long, difficult road still ahead. Then he looked down at the woman in his arms, the resilient heart who had been his compass, his reason, his redemption. "I would have burned the world down and started over from ash for you," he said, his voice a low, steady vow. "Every second of it was worth it, because it led me back here, to you." She tilted her head up and kissed him, a soft, lingering kiss filled with the quiet promise of all the peaceful tomorrows they had earned. In the end, this story teaches us that love's true power lies not in accepting darkness, but in inspiring the strength to overcome it. It shows that redemption is not a gift, but a difficult path one must choose to walk, and that true wealth is not what you own, but the person you are willing to become for someone else. We really hope you enjoyed this educational piece of content and hope that you could understand the moral lessons behind it. If this story touched your heart, please show your support by hitting the like button, subscribing to our channel for more tales of love and transformation, and sharing it with someone who believes in second chances. What did you think of Ji-hoon's grand gesture? Was changing his entire world the only way he could truly be with Soo-min? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And for our next story, who would you like to see find their own love story? Should we follow the ever-loyal Min-jun as he navigates the new, legitimate world of the Yunwol Corporation? Or perhaps Ji-hoon's sharp-tongued sister, Hyo-rin, who needs to learn a lesson about what truly matters? Vote now in the poll.